Ever heard of a tiny country trying to build an empire? Kind of crazy, right? Well, today we're diving into that story, Scotland's attempt back in the 17th century.
Ambitious, to say the
Oh,
least.
yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
It's a story of, well, ambition, obviously,
Yeah.
but also disaster and some serious political maneuvering that really shaped the United Kingdom as we know it.
It's fascinating, how the Darian scheme, as it's called, connects to so many themes we still see today.
Like what?
Well, like the desire for riches, how people take risks, and how what we do can have consequences we never intended. Stuff that's relevant even centuries later.
Okay, so paint the picture for us. Late 1600s, Europe is going crazy for empires.
Right. England, the Netherlands, everyone's grabbing colonies, making huge profits off trade overseas.
In Scotland, they're not exactly a powerhouse at this point.
No, pretty small, struggling economically, seeing all this wealth going elsewhere, and they wanted in on the action.
Enter William Paterson. Big personality, already made a name for himself in finance.
Yeah, he helped found the Bank of England, but his real skill, salesmanship. And what he sold the Scottish people was an empire of their own in Darian.
Modern-day Panama, right?
Exactly.
So what was his vision?
A trading empire. He said Darian was the key, this gateway between the Atlantic and Pacific. Scottish merchants could control everything, get unbelievably rich.
That's pretty good on paper.
Problem is, he kind of forgot to mention Spain already claimed that territory. Patterson was basically betting Spain was too weak to fight back. Risky, to say the least.
Well, people bought it, right?
Hook, line, and sinker. They formed the Company of Scotland, got the Scottish Parliament to back it, and raised an incredible £400,000.
From regular people.
All levels of Scottish society. Shows you how much they believed in this dream.
It's wild how that desire for wealth can make people overlook the risks, even hundreds of years ago.
Absolutely. The belief in Scotland's potential, it blinded a lot of people to what Darian was actually like.
So, 1698, off goes the first expedition. Over 1,200 colonists hoping for a new life, a share of the riches. But I'm guessing it didn't go smoothly.
You could say that. The journey was horrible, cramped ships, disease outbreaks, storms. Lots died before even reaching land.
And when they got there,
Not exactly paradise. Totally unprepared for the tropical environment.
they did set up a colony though, right?
New Edinburgh, they called it. But disease ran rampant, not enough supplies. And the Spanish, they were not happy about these Scottish newcomers.
Yeah, Spain was still a force to be reckoned with back then.
Oh, absolutely. They weren't letting some colony mess up their control over such a strategic area. To them, the Scots were trespassers. Gotta get rid of them.
And the Scots were hoping for help from the English, right? At least in the Caribbean.
You'd think so, wouldn't you? But no, English government actually banned any trade with the colony.
Wow.
Yeah, mix of politics and economics probably. But to the Scots, it felt like betrayal. Just made the bad blood between the countries even worse.
So disease, hunger, angry Spanish, no help from the English. No wonder the first expedition had to give up New Edinburgh. That's a brutal blow, but wasn't that the end of the Darian scheme, was it?
The Company of Scotland, well, they were desperate, wanted to get their money back, salvage some pride, so they decided on a second expedition.
Even after all that.
People cling to hope, even when it seems crazy. They'd invested so much money, emotion, couldn't accept it was over. But this second attempt in 1699, it was doomed right from the start.
What happened?
Arrived in Darien, found New Edinburgh deserted. And immediately, same problems hit them. Disease, hunger, the Spanish kept attacking. In the end, they had to surrender too.
How many people died in total across both expeditions?
Out of around 2,500 who set sail, nearly 1,800 never came back. A devastating loss for Scotland, really shattered their hopes of having an empire.
You know, it's easy to get caught up in the big picture, the whole empire thing. But the Darian scheme, it was real people's lives.
Oh, absolutely. Thousands of them. And they weren't just kings and generals, were they? It was ordinary folks.
Yeah, what kinds of people were we talking about?
All sorts. Soldiers, merchants, farmers. Some even brought their families, risked everything they had.
What made them do it? Go all the way to this far-off, dangerous place?
A lot of reasons. Some were just desperate, trying to escape poverty back home, hoping for a fresh start, something better for their families. Others, well, the adventure called to them. Chance to strike it rich in a new land.
That classic gold rush mentality.
Exactly. And then some, maybe they were the true believers, thought they were building an empire, bringing glory to Scotland.
Man, imagine those emotions. Excitement, fear, hope. And for so many, it all ended in despair.
It did. You know, we actually have some firsthand accounts from back then.
Really?
Yeah, letters, diaries, even poems written by the people who went. Gives you a glimpse into their lives, what they went through.
What about William Patterson himself? We've talked about him as the mastermind, but he was there too, wasn't he?
He was, invested a lot of his own money, lost it all. And even worse, his wife died during that first expedition. Patterson himself got very sick, barely made it out alive.
Wow. I hadn't realized it was that personal for him.
It was. And some historians think, that loss, it might have made him even more determined to make the scheme work.
Trying to prove those sacrifices, even his own, weren't for nothing.
Exactly. It's like he couldn't accept defeat, kept pushing for more expeditions, even after 2 disasters, ended up alienating a lot of people that way.
A tragic figure, in a way. But what about the other colonists, the ones who did survive? What happened to them back in Scotland?
They went back to a country that was reeling, The economy was a mess. Everyone had lost someone they knew. There was this feeling of, I don't know, disillusionment, maybe even shame.
Coming home after all that and finding what? Blame.
Yeah, sadly. People saw the Darian scheme as a failure, a humiliation. Easy to point fingers, harder to understand what those individuals went through.
So they experienced trauma over there, then came back to judgment. Just awful.
It is. Shows how quickly people forget about individual suffering when something big goes wrong. But a lot of those folks, they did rebuild their lives.
Resilient, huh?
They were. Many carried scars, physical and emotional, but they kept going. Those stories, they're important, remind us how strong people can be even when facing the worst.
It's easy to lose sight of that when you're looking at the big historical picture.
Right, but it's those individual stories that make history real. That's where you find the universal truths about hope and risk and how much we can endure.
We talked about the dream, the disaster, how many people suffered because of the Darian scheme. But it didn't just disappear, did it? What was its lasting impact on Scotland, on its relationship with the world?
Oh, it had consequences, for sure. Even though the scheme itself was pretty short-lived, its effects lasted for generations. Became a turning point in Scottish history, really. A symbol of, pride and shame all mixed up.
Almost like it meant different things to different people.
Exactly. Some folks saw it as a warning sign, right? Like, don't get too greedy for empires, look what happens. A reminder that wealth and power, they come at a cost, a human cost.
And others.
For them, it was all about betrayal. Proof that England was holding Scotland back, sabotaging their ambitions, made the bad blood between the two countries even worse.
What about the money side of things? England did end up bailing out those Scottish investors as part of the Act of Union in 1707. How should we see that? Was it just a way to shut Scotland up, or did it actually help in the long run?
Tough question. It's messy, right? On the one hand, you could say England just bought their way out of trouble, used money to silence opposition, get what they wanted. But then again, that money, that equivalent they called it, did help Scotland's economy. Invested in things that led to the Scottish Enlightenment, even the Industrial Revolution.
So a failed colony might have accidentally helped Scotland become successful later on.
It's possible. Being part of the Union opened up English markets for Scottish businesses, and then they had this extra capital from the bailout. Gave opportunities to entrepreneurs, innovators. Scotland became a hub for ideas and industry.
History's funny like that.
Yeah.
Something seems like a total failure, then it has these knock-on effects you'd never expect.
The Darian scheme is a perfect example of that. It's all tangled up, Forces us to think beyond just cause and effect, to consider what happens in the long run when people chase wealth or power or even just a national identity.
And speaking of identity, the Darian scheme really shaped how Scotland saw itself, right?
Yeah.
Both compared to England and on the world stage.
Definitely. The colony failed, which was humiliating, but it also made their identity stronger in a weird way. Sharing that loss, that feeling of being betrayed by England, it brought them together.
Strength through adversity.
Kinda, yeah. It became part of their story, passed down through generations. Reminds you that identity isn't just about winning. Sometimes it's about going through hardship together.
The Darian scheme, it's a great example of how history isn't just dates and names in a textbook.
It's people making choices, dealing with the fallout. And those choices, they echo through time. Still relevant today, I think.
Absolutely. So if we had to boil it down, what are the big lessons here? What should our listeners take away from all this?
Well, it shows that ambition's a double-edged sword, right? can drive you to achieve amazing things, but also lead to disaster. And it's crucial to see things from other people's viewpoints, not underestimate your rivals, or how complex the world really is. It's a story about the price of ambition and how stories themselves shape how we see ourselves and our place in the world.
Things to think about, for sure. Thank you for taking us through this part of history. It's been fascinating.
You're welcome. Glad you enjoyed it.
And to everyone listening, we hope you've enjoyed this deep dive into Scotland's failed empire. If you did, be sure to subscribe to the deep dive. We've got plenty more stories to explore. Until next time, keep questioning, keep learning, and keep diving deep.